Greetings. Thank you for visiting the Skirball Cultural Center's YouTube channel. My name is Sabrina Worf, and I am the Skirball's membership manager. The following talk was presented to Skirball members on Member Preview Day, May 3rd, 2023, in celebration of the Skirball's spring exhibitions, Blacklist, The Hollywood Red Scare, and Peter Krasnow, Breathing Joy and Light. In this program, you will hear about Blacklist, The Hollywood Red Scare. I hope you will also take time to watch the Curator Talk about the Peter Krasnow exhibition. Both programs were filmed by videographer Hal Banfield and his crew. Blacklist, The Hollywood Red Scare, and its related educational programs at the Skirball Cultural Center are made possible through generous donor support. Our valued members and donors make it possible for the Skirball to offer meaningful and engaging exhibitions and programs. Membership and donations sustain the Skirball's commitment to upholding timeless Jewish values by offering cultural experiences that celebrate discovery and hope, foster human connections, and call upon us to help build a more just society. We often hear the phrase, "It takes a village." Our Skirball village, our community, would not be complete without our members and donors. We are grateful for their support, generosity, commitment, and active involvement. In this program, you will hear from Skirball Chief Curator Cate Thurston and Ellie Gettinger, the originating curator of the Blacklist exhibition at Jewish Museum Milwaukee. Today, she is the Director of Digital Learning at JTS, the Jewish Theological Seminary. During this program, you will hear from Vice President and Museum Director of the Skirball Cultural Center, Sherry Bernstein. Having joined the Skirball in 2001, Sherry led the education and visitor experience teams and served as project director for the internationally acclaimed Noah's Ark at the Skirball exhibition before becoming the museum director in 2021. Prior to the Skirball, she spent 6 years at LACMA in the Modern and Contemporary Art Department and has also held positions at the Smithsonian American Art Museum, the Baltimore Museum of Art, and the Institute of Contemporary Art, Boston. Sherry earned undergraduate and graduate degrees in art history at Yale and Harvard Universities, respectively. And now, I invite you to sit back and learn from our experts.
It's my pleasure to introduce our presenters on the Hollywood Blacklist exhibition who are going to be in conversation with one another. Why don't you both just come up and sit down, and then I'll introduce you. Yeah. First, I want to introduce Ellie Gettinger, who's on my far right, I guess that's stage left, who curated Blacklist, The Hollywood Red Scare for the Jewish Museum Milwaukee. Ellie is presently the Director of Digital Learning for the Jewish Theological Seminary. During her years at the Jewish Museum in Milwaukee, she was the Education Director, working to foster understanding on such topics as immigration, the Holocaust, and the Jewish community for audiences of all different ages. Ellie holds a bachelor's degree in Jewish studies with a focus on history from Stanford University and a master's degree from Spertus Institute, and we are just delighted to have her here with us today. Joining Ellie for this portion of the program is Skirball Curator Cate Thurston, who many of you know. She is the coordinating curator for Blacklist, The Hollywood Red Scare. Having joined the Skirball team in 2015, Cate co-curated I'll Have What She's Having, the Jewish deli. I almost called it the Hollywood deli. There's at least one there. And prior to that, curated the acclaimed exhibition Notorious RBG, The Life and Times of Ruth Bader Ginsburg, which like like the Delhi exhibition, is traveling the country currently. And I'll just say that the show opens at its final venue, the new Capitol Jewish Museum in Washington, D.C., later this month. Prior to the Skirball, Cate worked at the Autry Museum of the American West in educational, visitor experience, and curatorial roles. She holds a BA in American History from Franklin Pierce University and a Master's in History from Cal State Northridge. Cate worked closely with Ellie to augment the original exhibition for its presentation at the Skirball in ways that I'm sure they'll share with you, adding 2 content sections and over 100 artifacts. Please join me in welcoming Ellie and Cate and enjoy this conversation.
Well, hi. Thank you so much for that wonderful introduction, Sherry. I am so excited to be here with you.
We met for the first time in person yesterday.
Yeah.
And it was like a strange homecoming for people to be like, Legs, you, oh, crazy, you know.
So it's been really special. So we're here to talk about the Blacklist. I am going to ask Ellie a lot of questions. We have a slideshow. We'll talk about some of the artifacts that are new. And then at the end of this, there'll be a Q&A.
But I don't know that they'll have any questions here. It seems like a really quiet audience.
It's a quiet audience, no questions.
So my mic on, can you hear me? Okay, thank you.
So Ellie, how did you come up with the idea for this exhibition?
So this, I'm gonna take you back. It's a very long but shortened version. When I was in high school, I grew up in rural East Tennessee, which is not a bedrock of huge amounts of people who are interested in either communism or Hollywood. I decided to do my senior research paper on the Hollywood Blacklist after seeing the Oscars in which Elia Kazan is given his honorary Oscar. And I mean, go and look at, if you haven't watched this or you haven't seen it in the last 20 years, it's interesting because you watch a crowd that is normally so united in their effusive praise of someone be wholly divided, and you know, you can see who's sitting and who's standing, and I just wanted to know more about that period. So I took on that research project, and then fast forward, 16 years or so later, I'm sitting in Jewish Museum Milwaukee on a very quiet Sunday. The Milwaukee Air Show is in town. People don't like to go to museums when they feel like their air show bombing, not bombing, but sounds overhead. So it's silent, and I'm, you know, maybe watching something on YouTube, maybe. And there was a trailer for Trumbo, and it all took me back to that 17-year-old doing research to say, this is not just a great story, it has so many elements that people would be interested in. It was the summer of 2016, so it felt like there were lots of contemporary elements that would really be resonant in a lot of ways, in ways that I didn't even picture in the summer of 2016. And so I thought, there's got to be a traveling exhibit for this. You know, I'm going to just bring in an exhibit. Maybe I'll adapt it a little. That's it. And the only thing I found was a 2001 exhibit that the Academy of Art had done. But it had been put away. It was never intended for travel. And it seems like it was a really interesting topic. The thing that made it appropriate, you know, so yeah, why would Milwaukee do this? In my quick and pushing for this potential exhibit, I discovered that one of the largest archives of Blacklist material happens to be at the University of Wisconsin-Madison. Yeah, do we have some Badgers in the house? At least one. Oh, two.
Hey, my advisor was a Badger, so
3, okay, so great. At Madison, basically this professor, a guy named Robert Heffman, in 1960, just as the Blacklist was maybe starting to recede a bit, had started reaching out to Blacklistees to say, I want your materials, and really was the first person to dive into that world. So 6 of the 10 Hollywood 10 have their archive at University of Wisconsin-Madison in the Wisconsin Center for Theater and Film Research. Kirk Douglas has his archive from the 1940s to the 1960s there. The Hollywood Democratic Committee has their, you know, so it's a lot of really resonant material, and it made it so that I had an archive to support the work that I was doing. And needless to say, this exhibit opened in 2018. There were new and different ways of presenting the material. There were new and different topics of contemporary interest that related to it. We're 5 years after that. Nothing is, you know, and there's only more to get into. There's only more thorny issues that this exhibit brings up.
One of the things whenever I share that so many of, I think about a full third of what we've added at the Skirball came from the Wisconsin Center for Film and Theater Research, and a great bulk of what was in the traveling exhibition to begin with. Folks are surprised that they have such a deep holding, right? I mean, especially as Angeli knows, we tend to believe we're the center of film and television history. We're surprised it exists other places. So could you tell us a little bit about why 6 of the 10 have their archives there?
I think mainly because of Hethman's outreach, and I think once, I believe Trumbo and Maltz decided fairly early, Dalton Trumbo and Albert Maltz, who are 2 of the 10 Hollywood 10, put their things in fairly quickly. It's interesting, Trumbo also has collections at USC, basically because Wisconsin ran out of money to have them ship pieces at that point. And so if you look, there's collections of both. Of course, as a Wisconsin elitist, I will say the better stuff's in Wisconsin. You know, but it's you get and then it's really a question of once people start donating, that kind of snowballs, and you get more and more stuff there because you want and they're building a center. But with that said, there's great Blacklist material all over the country in all sorts of different archives, and I think I just happen to have a great relationship with this archive. And one of the things that both Cate and I love in putting together an exhibit is when you find an archivist like Mary Hulsbeck at the Wisconsin Center, who is both a subject area expert who really knows her collections and also is just incredibly generous with the collection itself and the time she dedicated to working with both of us to make sure that we had the things that we needed.
Yeah, absolutely. Some of the pieces that are included in the exhibition, I don't believe have been displayed before and are just incredible. I wanted to talk a little bit about the similarities between Jewish Museum Milwaukee and the Skirball. We are both we are both Jewish museums, and I wanted to talk about why you think this exhibition makes so much sense at a Jewish museum.
So I'm laughing because the Jewish Museum Milwaukee is about 5,000 total square feet. The entire museum. Where we have
every inch is perfect.
Perfect. Yeah, we opened in 2008. I was there for the first 15 plus years of that, and it's a really lovely museum that looks at the regional history of Jewish life in Wisconsin. It gives a sense of kind of broader Jewish culture and religion, and then we really want to look at kind of questions of what it means to be an American and what are the challenges there, and I think that's really where we intersect. I think there's this question also as a Jewish museum of what are the responsibilities to both the Jewish community, how you're portraying yourself internally, and how you're portraying yourself to an external audience. Like, what are the ways in which we are a facility in which people come to learn what it means to be Jewish? And I think that that's a very different mission than if you're a Holocaust museum or a different ethnic, that if you're a museum of Italian history, you don't necessarily have the same kind of baggage, potentially, of people coming in, or the same sense that you need to be the light unto the nations. So I think that that's where we really intersect. And I think this exhibit in particular is kind of at the sweet spot of what both of us do. It gets into thorny issues of history. It uses elements of Jewish life and culture, and it expands it to show how this impacts other populations and communities.
I couldn't have dreamed up a better answer for that question. I should say that every question I'm asking Ellie, she has gone in blind. I have not shared these in advance.
She promised me there'd be softballs. So
I did. I'll get to those.
Okay.
What's your favorite color? Orange. Orange. I wouldn't have guessed that. One of the things I think, building off that point, that makes the exhibition so fresh is the framing of it. And the question-based framing, which is so Jewish to me, right? It's a foundational way of looking at the world. Can you tell me a little bit about your thinking with developing, for those of you who haven't been in the exhibition, every panel ends with a question. So you're presented historical information, and then you're asked to connect the past to the present.
Well, the Jewish way to answer that question would be like, well, why do you think I did that? I think, so I will say, as a curator, I am not someone who trained as a curator. I am an education person. I'm a person who worked in museum education for many years, and one of the things I love is translating things to multiple audiences and getting an exhibit or an idea or a topic and saying, okay, to 12-year-olds who have no understanding of what communism is, to give them some way of doing that. And I found that questions are the #1 way that you can get kind of interaction, although I don't, how many docents are in the room here right now? Yeah, you guys know, you throw out questions all the time, right? And sometimes they pick them up, and sometimes you're like, Bueller, and nothing happens. But I wanted to, as someone who does that regularly with the museum population, I wanted to find a way as the kind of authoritative presence within the exhibit to exert that kind of docent-like presence, to say, here are the ways, the questions that really are concerning me as I'm thinking about this exhibit. I can't necessarily provide answers to all of these. And in fact, we don't. We leave them, we give you background without giving answers for most of them.
Yeah, no, what I love about it, and I've said this before to you, and you've said some version of this to me, is that I think our jobs as museum professionals, and especially at this point in America, are not to tell people how to think, but to facilitate the conditions for critical thinking. I think it's essential to a democracy. I think it's essential for learning to bridge difference. And I'm really excited that this exhibition, does just that. So let's talk a little bit about this exhibition at the Skirball. It's travel.
Can we first of all say that, again, going back to space, what Cate has taken here is something that was about 1,000, maybe 1,200 square feet in Milwaukee, and she's expanded it to about 2,500 square feet. So it is a big job that she took on in adapting this. This isn't something that a lot of museums, a lot of times when you take an exhibit, the expectation is, I don't really need to do much work to adapt it. And I think that one of the things that I truly value about my partner here at Skirball is that she was willing to say, I see this exhibit, I see what it can be, and I know I'm going to have to do a lot of work to make it work in this space.
Well, thank you. I mean, it was such strong material to start with, and we just had to make it fit our space. That was our challenge. How do we bring this here? We knew that it was an LA story. We knew that the narrative was so strong, and we just physically needed to fill up the Milken, right? And so let's talk about that process, how we filled up the Milken.
So it was great. I think it was December, and you were like, well, we have about 2 months until we have to have everything into our registrar.
Which is bananas. We should just admit that's a bananas thing. Normally, we work for years, and we ended up pivoting and realizing that we had the capacity to do a much larger build-out than we thought of. So yeah, I called you blind in December.
Yeah, I was in New York when you called me.
Did I think I used LinkedIn to contact.
You might have. Yeah, I think that we were having. There were some tricky things. I'm not with the museum anymore.
Yeah.
How do we? And so I get this email out of the blue. I know it's coming to Skirball. I'm really excited. One of the challenging things about leaving a museum where you've curated something is that you leave the work behind. You're like, this was great. I love this exhibit, and now I'm going to go away from my baby, and I'll never see it again. Goodbye. And dramatic pause, and that's all. And this was, I get this email out of the blue, and I'm like, heck yeah, I'd love to do this kind of work, because this is an area that I'm passionate about. And so I think pretty much immediately, I knew I had the week between Christmas and New Year's off. Thank you, JTS. And I started just going through archive after archive to see what was available, knowing that probably I was going to try, because I had a relationship with the Wisconsin Archive, to really center that. Yep. The other thing that I did really quickly in that early week is reach out to every academic historian, person that I had contact with in the original exhibition, and really the two that ended up being the most helpful in this were a guy named Larry Saplayer, who was based in LA for many, many years. He actually curated the exhibit that was in 2001 at the Academy Pre-Museum, whatever it used to be. And a guy named Glenn Frankel, who wrote the book High Noon, which both Larry's work and Glenn's work, along with a work by Victor Navasky called Naming Names. These were like my three
all for sale in the bookshop
Bibles of this exhibit. And Larry very quickly, had seen the exhibit. They both talked in Milwaukee, and they started connecting me with the people who they had. And so they had contact with. I didn't have the kind of clout, I think, in 2016, 2017, when I was developing the exhibit at the beginning, because Larry had never seen what I'd produced, Who's going to say that a museum in Milwaukee is going to create? Like, there's a little, come on, LA, You can tell me. You were suspicious. You're like, this is an exhibit about Hollywood from Milwaukee?
We care a lot about Milwaukee and during election seasons. We're very tuned in then.
Right. And well, aside from our very dire basketball collapse recently, we've had some, we get periodically picked up. But, so I think once I could go back to Larry, who had seen the exhibit, and once I could go back to these people, they'd seen the exhibit, they knew the exhibit, they knew that it was well told, it was a story that was well told. They then became willing to connect me with people that I hadn't had the ability to connect with in the original installation. One of those people was Mitzi Trumbo, and I think that was really a turning point for us.
I mean, the day you texted me, and it was all caps, and it said, "You have an email from Mitzi Trumbo." It was like exclaiming it. It was a warning. It was, I was excited.
I think we were both screaming and we may have heard each other from LA to Milwaukee, like just how quickly it came in. And she was here last night with her granddaughter. And she, I had this like dream. I was like, well, maybe she'll lend us Dalton Trumbo's, and I just wanted one of the Oscars. Dalton Trumbo received 2 Oscars while he was blacklisted. One was given to Ian McKellen Hunter for Roman Holiday. The other was never awarded because it was a pen name, Robert Rich, for The Brave One. And it wasn't awarded until the 1980s as they started working on restoring credit to things. And like I had this like pipe dream, like of course Mitzi Trumbo's gonna lend us these Oscars. And I believe we were like 20 minutes into this lovely conversation, and she's like, well, what can I do for you? And I was so nervous asking. Yeah. I kind of was like, she's been so nice. I don't want to make this feel like this is transactional. I'm really, and I could feel my heart palpitating in this way that I'm like, I'm going to ask somebody to lend me an Oscar. And I was like, do you think you might be willing to lend the Oscar? She's like, sure. They just sit here. And it turns out actually, and there are pictures of this, they sit around her house in like a tutu. That's the doll clothes that fits.
We actually were having a behind-the-scenes look at the tutu in collection storage, and it's a hairband with like a tulle wrapped around it. So it's a homemade tutu, custom. It's a custom tutu. I've also seen some photos of them with googly eyes. Yeah.
And according to, actually, talking to her last night, you can see one of them, the one that's for Roman Holiday, is quite a bit more beat up than the Brave One, because it lived with her mother, Cleo, for many years, and Cleo had a cat who liked to eat it.
Yeah.
So that's some like, I just got that knowledge last night. But that's what you do with your Oscar. You'd have it is cat toy.
And what was so exciting in talking to Mitzi was she was so generous with her time and her family's history, but with additional artifacts. And the one that kind of hits me like a ton of bricks are the ribbon tins. And I was wondering if you could tell us a little bit more about the ribbon tins.
I had no expectation of that. Like, this was really a left field. Like, we kept kind of going back and we were like, do you have anything that shows personal connections? Do you have? And she's like, oh, I have these typewriter ribbon boxes that my dad collected while he was in jail. And you're like, what? And Dalton Trumbo, like all of the members of the Hollywood 10, were found in contempt of Congress. They appealed this decision all the way to the Supreme Court, where the Supreme Court decided that they were not going to hear the decision in 1949, and then all 10 of the Hollywood 10 went to jail for 6 months to a year and had to pay a $5,000 fine. So in terms of the blacklist, the only people who were really jailed, Pete Seeger is in this list, but the 10 are the people who were jailed. And these were the pieces he collected. He had been a typist while he was in jail, and they're just the little things that he put aside as he found in jail. So again, it's that incredibly personal moment. Like, these are the things he found and touched and held on to. He actually, I don't know if did she tell you the story of how she got these?
No.
I learned this last night. This is a good one, docents, so hold on to this. You can tell I'm in museum education because this is how so she had gotten these two little bins from Bryan Cranston, who played Dalton Trumbo in the movie. And he had gotten them from the son of the chaplain who was at the prison, because Trumbo had just left them behind and said, he said, what do you want? They had formed a relationship while he was there. He was the typist. They were working together on something. And he said, I don't need them. This is just, stuff. There's supposedly 12 of them. We have 2. So just know, guys, there are 10 more out there somewhere. And he had sent Cranston these 2 boxes with a script. Welcome to California. Yeah. And he, Bryan Cranston, didn't do anything with them, with the script, but he gave the boxes to Mitzi, who
nice guy.
Was really touched by them and has tried to reach out and reconnect to get the other 10, but hasn't been able to. So if anybody wants to do a little legwork for Mitzi Trumbo, I'm sure she'd really love those other 10 boxes. But
we went through the contents of the ribbon tins when we took them in, because whenever we take something in, we fill out forms about it. It's called a condition report. And we unpacked each piece. There's a children's Bible that's teeny tiny. There's
a tiny train.
A tiny train.
Oh, it's so cute.
There's a picture of Lenin. There's, there's little tiny mirrors.
They're really small.
Really small.
But it is, again, that and I think that's one of the things we got from UW-Madison as well, are these letters from children and to children when they were in prison. And I think it's one of the things that we really attempted to do is take this big emotionless bureaucratic story and say, here are the people who were impacted. And it's not just about these guys lost their jobs, but this is the way families were separated, and this is the way in which children were responding. We wanted to find kind of some emotional heart, not that it's not there and just hearing about financial hardship and creative disruption, but the kind of big disruptions that are across generations and still are impacting these families.
I have 2 final questions for you. And I'll give them to you at the same time because I saw we got the 3 minutes.
Okay.
The first is, what is your favorite addition for our venue? And the second is, why should we care about this history today?
Oh man, my favorite addition, I always like to say it's choosing your favorite kid. You love them all. I have to say, okay, no, I know the answer. And this was, I think, something I sent you, and I was like, you will not believe this. There were so many collections and boxes at the Wisconsin Center for Film and Theater. There were just endless things that I hadn't been able to get to in my original research. This really gave me a much less compressed timeline. In some ways, it was compressed for you, but I could be kind of fluid because I knew I was just looking for visuals. I wasn't looking to build a history. And so in the Alva Bessie, again, one of the Hollywood 10, in his collection, he had worked at the Hungry Eye Club in San Francisco, and he had been the stage manager there and had had all sorts of connections while he's there. There's some interesting things. There's a contract between him and, it's not in the exhibit, but between him and Ed Sullivan, when he was doing some project for him in that time period. But my absolute 100% favorite things are the things between Alva Bessie and Lenny Bruce.
They're in the exhibit.
They are in the exhibit. There is a fabulous telegram in which Lenny Bruce is saying, I'm going to hire you to do some script doctoring for 2 scripts that I'm writing. Make sure you leave the communist stuff out because I'm already known as a drug addict and I don't need any more baggage. I'm not quoting, but I'm kind of close.
Yeah, you're very close.
And then you see next to that, and I think this is one of the brilliant things with staging is that you could really show this whole story, is a contract between Bessie and Bruce where they're really spelling out what Bruce is getting. Everything is going to be just under Lenny Bruce's name despite Bessie's work, and this is the amount he's getting paid over this. It's $750 over X number of weeks at $50 a week, and there will be a residual if they're actually produced, and then we have actually a copy of the script that just has Lenny Bruce's name on it, and all of that was just in there, and I was just like, wow, this gives such a good illustration of the story.
And because we get this question a lot, the script is called The Degenerate, and it was never produced.
Yeah, but I kind of want to see it.
I do too.
If anybody here has a connection, there's a script called The Degenerate written by Lenny Bruce and Alva Bessie. We'll give him some credit.
Yeah.
What do I hope people? So the second question.
Why should we care about this history today? Yeah.
I mean, this is the thing. When I started this exhibit in 2016, there was a moment in that election when I think Newt Gingrich was saying we need to bring back the House Un-American Activities Committee. And it was specifically that he wanted to look at Muslim bans. And I'm like, this is going to be about Muslim bans. That's what we're going to, it's going to be good. And then by the time the exhibit opened in 2018, the world was in 100% a different place. And so you're like, And we're 5 years, as I said, after that, and there's still so many things. You had this answer this morning, and I really think it's the answer that I go to as well, about the thing that this exhibit really shows is what happens when we don't talk across difference. Yeah. What happens when we don't understand who our rivals are, who our opponents are, what their point of view is, what their perspective is. Everybody involved in the Blacklist thought they were doing their patriotic duty. Now, I'm not going to say that someone like Joe McCarthy, who is not involved with the House Un-American Activities Committee or the Hollywood Blacklist at all, I will be very clear on that because that's one of the things that I think is also important in looking at this period, that you can't lump in all of the evil of a period with one person, that it is huge numbers of different parts of the government that were involved in the Blacklist, and it's not McCarthyism, it's a Red Scare, it is.
Though Larry Seplier has a great line about that.
Yeah.
McCarthyism predates McCarthy.
For sure. Yeah, no, I mean, he picks everything up in 51. This starts in 47. But I think that you have people who really felt that they were supporting the fundamental freedom and the existential freedom of the United States by taking on action against communists or people who they saw as communist sympathizers. And then on the flip side, you saw the people who were being implicated in the Blacklist saying, no, this is my, democratic right, my freedom of speech. This is my freedom of assembly. I am allowed to be engaged in this way, and these people are fascists. And I think those sorts of labels are dangerous. And it also meant that many people were impacted, and we just need to find ways to communicate that across these differences, and we still need that.
Yeah. Well, Ellie, it has been such a pleasure working with you.
I know, I'm already conspiring with Cate. I'm like, well, maybe you could just, I'll do this for you.
This isn't the end.
Yeah.
There's an idea here.
There's going to be a buddy flick.
Yeah. I see Sabrina. I want to be mindful of time. And is this handover for Q&A? Are we asking Laura to join us?
Yes, we're asking Laura to join us. Definitely. We're going to have a Q&A. We're going to transition to a Q&A. You guys ready for that?
Yes. And I should say, I got so excited by Ellie's answers and the question that I figured I'd skip the photos in the PowerPoint, and what you'll see in the gallery is much more dynamic. So Ellie's answers were much better than a still life photo. I don't want you to feel like you were robbed of anything.
Okay, great. So we're going to transition over to Q&A. So please stick around for Q&A for both exhibitions. All the curators are remaining on stage. And the way we're going to do the Q&A is we've got a stand over here with a mic and a stand at this end with a mic. And so if you're interested in asking a question, just head on over to one of the mics, and then you'll be able to ask your questions, and we'll take turns. So head on up if you want to ask questions. All right, we've got our first question.
Very quickly, when you went through your artifacts, did you find an old copy of Johnny Got His Gun? Did you find a script for The Brave One? And I'll stop there.
Oh, you are in for a treat.
We found lots of scripts. Yeah. And actually, on top of the scripts we found at the Wisconsin Center, Mitzi Trumbo actually is an excellent repository of family archive. Here's the thing. All of you have endless collections of family pictures, I'm sure. Are they in boxes? And I'm sure some of you have them in albums and they're labeled. Some of you. And then there are those of you, like Mitzi Trumbo, who have all of your family pictures in a Google Drive with dates and times and people.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, I mean, so she also had all of his work. She had all of his scripts, all of his books.
There is a script for The Brave One in the gallery
great.
With annotations on it. We don't know if they're Trumbo or if they're Mitzi's, but it lays out who the script was for, when it was written, where it was written. It's at the end of the exhibition.
Excellent. Also, is it possible to get a copy of Red Channels? Does it still exist?
You can buy them online.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, we have another question right here.
It's my friend from Wayfinding. Hi.
Hello. Good to see you. Thank you so much. The question on the Blacklist exhibit is, how is your adaptation to Los Angeles? What were you looking for? What theme? Or how did you choose and decide to add to the Blacklist exhibit for Los Angeles specifically?
So the text that you see in gallery is very, very similar to the text that has traveled with the show nationally. The only difference is we've really stretched it to match objects. So really what we were looking for was to match artifacts to existing text, right? The narrative was so strong, we wanted to just add to it artifactually. So you'll see a lot of additions that are scripts, you'll see letters. We really wanted to emphasize that these were people who had lost something, right? Financially, their freedom, their ability to work, time with their family. But really it was a little bit of a puzzle.
The Writers Guild pieces,
Oh, yes.
that there are 9 Writers Guild membership cards with different names on them, all the same persons. And I think that those are the sorts of things that, because of the relationships in LA, that we had we got a great artifact from the Screen Actors Guild that I think you guys were able to like pull from some local resources that we wouldn't have had the ability to do.
I didn't actually find that piece. Our amazing admin, Sophie, found that piece in the archive with me. She was the one who pulled my attention to it, and it was such a find.
Thank you.
Do we have any more questions? Don't be shy. Come on up. I can bring the mic to someone, sure. Sandra. Excuse me.
The exhibition looks fascinating. However, my question is, talking about the impact on families, you know, all of this came about after World War II, preceded by terrible depression, where people really didn't know what they were going to eat and where it was going to come from. Some of the docents had parents that worked in the industry that were caught up in this maelstrom of, was it you? Was it you? Do you know anybody? And what they said to a man, because they were fathers with families, we didn't know if we were going to have a job. We didn't know where the food was going to come from. They didn't have any names to give anybody, but they said it was fraught with this terrible decision. Is this something that is covered in the exhibition? I haven't walked through yet, but I'm just curious. The emotional impact of something like this is far more resonant than just the words. So.
Right. I think that's really one of the things we wanted to get to, is just those kinds of challenges. And I think to your point, and it's hard to imagine that when this starts, you're really only like a decade and a half away from, or not even, you're 8 years out of the Great Depression, World War II, and World War II, and you're in this epic period of, and you're in this sense of insecurity in general, and you see it. One of my favorite pieces in this, I actually trade secret. Members, when you're developing an exhibit like this with historical ephemera, you go to archives, you look for things, and we also go to eBay.
Yeah. Let me ask you.
Wait, let me finish the answer. One of the things I found on eBay was an advertisement that was created by one of the many response committees. All of the people who were on this committee ended up being blacklisted or naming names, and it was called the Freedom from Fear Committee. And they put together, it's right as you kind of are walking around the first corner, it's a 10-point checklist where they're asking you to rate yourself. It's called Tired, Jittery, and, you know, is there a blacklist coming? This is actually I think it's published right before the Waldorf statement in which the blacklist comes in. And it goes through the set of things that people are nervous about at this moment. Do you feel like you're hearing a click on the other end of the phone? Is there, are you worried about your next screen project? Are you taking out that sense of this plot point? Are you worried about your third vote for Roosevelt or the money you gave for the Spanish Civil War? And it's really going through that kind of sense of fear, and people having to do that kind of mental checklist of, wait, what are the things that are going to be a challenge for me? Where does that exist for me? And I think we have all of these things where it's showing a sampling. It's not everybody, but the people who went to jail, the people who faced financial hardship, the people who were impacted by exile, because we wanted to show just how fraught this question was. And to that same point, we talk about naming names, and we talk a lot about what were the impetuses for people to name names. So if you're Jerome Robbins and you're afraid of being outed, you know, maybe is it more justifiable that you were willing to name names, or is it still abhorrent? And I think that's some of the questions we wanted to be able to explore.
And I'll add to that, you know, part of the reason I don't have the same subject area expertise on this that Ellie has, but the reason I was the Skirball curator for this was because my grandparents were gray-listed and my great uncle was blacklisted, and my grandparents, both of them were born in Los Angeles. My grandmother, her father was a silent movie actor, Snitz Edwards. If you've seen Buster Keaton's College, he's the dean, all 4 feet of him. And, she'd grown up in Hollywood. She'd had a very comfortable upbringing, and the Great Depression had decimated her family. And she'd gone to work, she dropped out of college, and she and my grandfather had come up at the studios together and were story analysts. They'd been able to buy a plot of land, build a home, I should say, in Benedict Canyon. And when the hearings started, they were gripped with fear. They ended up selling their home in Benedict Canyon. They moved into basically a beach shack just a little bit south of Ojai near Carpinteria. My grandfather fished and traded for vegetables with farmers. Their life was profoundly disrupted. And it wasn't until the mid-50s that they achieved any sort of financial security again. And my grandfather was commuting from Ojai to Warner Brothers just to see if the studio job would take. So, in the selection of the object, Ellie's subject area expertise, and I think my sensitivity to the loss that people had really shaped the choices we made in our editions. And we really wanted to convey the humor sometimes with like Lenny Bruce and the Lewis Pollock letter, which we'll talk to you after about if you're interested, the desperation, the survival. We wanted the roundness and the difficulty of this story. And so it was... And the humanness, yeah.
We're going to take 2 more questions, and we've already got 2 people with mic, one over here and then we'll do a little quick wrap up. So go ahead.
Well, I was just wondering if anybody here was a writer in that time or in the industry. I was working in 1965. My husband went back to UCLA to film school, and we met Luli Barmsman, who was the daughter of Barmsman, and the musician Mitrik Duhamtgen. I know he left the country. A lot of people left the country. A lot of them, I think Mel Torme and his wife, they wrote under different pseudonyms also. So it was and that was, 62, 65 was.
I think the Screen Actors Guild was still asking people to sign loyalty oaths until 1967.
And now we have to worry about the phones.
Yeah.
And Ellie, can you tell us who broke the loyalty oaths?
Yeah, the Grateful Dead.
That's not a joke.
It's they said they were doing one of those musical documentaries, and it's a credit. You had to, they were joining the guild, and they were like, and now, could you please sign the loyalty oaths? And they're the Grateful Dead, and they're like, hell no. But they were like, well, we're not gonna do our music documentary about the Grateful Dead without the Grateful Dead. It would be a really weird movie.
So we can thank the Grateful Dead for the end of loyalty oaths.
So many other things
and
as well.
A 20-minute song. Nope.
One last question right over here.
Hi. As a teenager, I used to watch on black and white TV the McCarthy hearings. And as the recollection of how he trashed people.
Have you no shame?
Is so dramatic. I'm just curious if you have one of those videotapes as part of the exhibit, because that would bring to life what was really going on. It was unbelievable how he got away with that until one day he was called.
Yeah, in gallery, we have some amazing footage of the HUAC testimonies in 1947.
It's not the Army McCarthy hearings. Yeah. And I think that this was one of the challenges of the exhibit, and especially when you're coming from Wisconsin, the expectation is in Milwaukee, you have this exhibit open, and you're like, we're doing an exhibit about the Blacklist, and everybody walks in, and you're like, I know about the Blacklist, McCarthy, and you're like, no, not. And so we really tried to, we have a section about why McCarthy is important in talking about this time period and why McCarthy is not important to the story of the Blacklist. And so we tried to disconnect the two. In our programming, we did do a whole program on McCarthy, his influence, and kind of those Wisconsin ties, because clearly for our patrons, that was, you know, when you talk about what is resonant, that is a truly resonant thing. I like to remind everyone that Wisconsin is the state where Fighting Bob LaFollette is also from, you know, so we are a weird, amorphous state that is purple.
I will say we added a really interesting piece about McCarthy that we added the Jewish Museum contextual text to. And I think the exhibition is very even-handed, and I think, you know, as a curator, I try and not be apolitical, because everyone has their politics, but make space for everyone from a wide range of opinions and backgrounds, and it's one of the things I loved about your curatorial practice. I will say I didn't do that with the McCarthy piece. It is a newspaper that says the financial crimes of Joseph McCarthy, published in 1953. So a little bit of bias there, but the rest of the exhibition is very even-handed.
All right. Thank you, guys. Let's give everybody a round of applause. You guys did amazing. Thank you so much.